guys. We're back here in our November class time, and as has been one of the themes that Enos was pointing out a little earlier, is one of the things I try to do is introduce you to as many resources through these classes that will be available to you in your farming career. And today we're joined by Dan Smith, who's a division administrator for the agriculture development, is called now, division at DATCP, which he'll explain a little more, but that has a lot of the business aspects of farm, a lot of the different markets, different enterprises that way, as well as the Wisconsin Farm Center, which is a service that's available. Dan's going to talk a little bit more about that in his presentation, and thank you, Dan.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you. We can keep this pretty informal. So my name is Dan Smith. I'll give you a little bit about my background, and then if you could introduce yourselves and a little bit about exactly what you're interested in as far as your farming operations or potential operations would be. So I'm a UW graduate. I returned to the family farm in Illinois and was a dairy farmer for 30 years, from 1978 to 2008. So most of my background is in production agriculture and dairy farming. I left the farm, sold my farm and my cows in 2008, relocated near Madison, started as a volunteer at the Department of Agriculture during the milk price decline of 2009, where we were overwhelmed with assisting farmers with financial analysis and coming up with new plans and a way to stay in farming when milk hit about $9 at that time. After about 2 years at the Department of Ag, I was named CEO of Midwestern BioAg, which is a fertilizer and animal feed company near Blue Mounds, Wisconsin. I was in that position for about 3 years till Secretary Bransel brought me back to the Department of Agriculture to be the Administrator of Ag Development. So at the Department of Agriculture, there are 5 different divisions, 4 of whom are primarily responsible for some form of regulatory or permitting, such as consumer protection. Consumer protection is the agent or the division who ensures that when you pay for $5 worth of gas at the gas station, that you actually got $5 worth of gas. So they do all the certifications on weights and measures and those types of things. Food safety, of course, you run into those. They have to look at every single restaurant. They now are charged with doing a lot of work with roadside stands. So if you're interested in a value added or a smaller type of agriculture where you're really selling farm to table, and we'll talk about that a little bit, food safety and all the regulations that come with that would be very important. That would be an agency that you would work with. There's also ag resource management, which works with the feed industry in the state, ensuring that the quality of feed that is produced or any type of mixing that is done or any other agricultural like land management programs go through that. And then we have our internal really HR and division management division. So that leaves my division, Ag Development. Secretary Bransel always says that at DATCP we regulate, and promote. My division is the promoting part. So ag development means that we work across every part of Wisconsin agriculture, from the smallest farm all the way to international companies, because we have 3 different divisions. We have the Farm Center that Randy mentioned, where we work directly with farmers on almost any challenge or opportunity a farmer could face. And it doesn't matter if it's a farmer with 15 goats or a farmer with 5,000 dairy cows. Right, and we take about 2,000 phone calls a year from farmers, and they could be a 5-minute conversation about some issue that they happen to be having that day. We have other cases that have been open for 4 to 5 years. Those are usually farm transitions, where we're trying to transition the farm from one generation to the next, or put together a long-term financial analysis package. So it can be very quick. It can be very in-depth. Besides the Farm Center, one more thing about the Farm Center. We also work with minority farmers, and we work with beginning farmers. And about half of our calls right now are financial stress calls because of the drop in commodity and dairy prices. And I would say the other half generally involve a lot of transitions, either getting into farming or exiting farming and wanting to sell your farm or transition your farm and your operation to the next generation. Those are our two big wheelhouses that we work in at the farm center. If you step off the farm into the distribution, processing, market development, local and regional foods, that is our ag and food center. So we work all across the state with like the cheesemakers, the meat processors, vegetable processors on any challenge or opportunity they may face. As I go around the state and talk to them now, one of the main challenges that they're facing is getting qualified labor into the cheese plants or the processing plants. We also work to make sure that the distribution channels are established and to grow the markets. And then the third center is our international trade team, where we have 5 people who travel throughout the world making introductions and representing Wisconsin around the world. Well, just today I have a person from our staff leaving for China. She'll be in China for 10 days, meeting with different buyers in China and different government officials, representing Wisconsin agriculture, making sure they understand what products we have to sell and how those products would reach China. At the same time, we host delegations from around the world who come to Wisconsin, and we take them around and make sure, say they come here and they're interested in buying milking parlor equipment. Then we make sure that we get them in front of all the producers of milking parlor equipment in Wisconsin. We don't make the deal. We're not in the room when the deal is finalized. We're the matchmaker. We set up the meetings and make sure everyone is on the same page and that a successful transaction will take place. During World Dairy Expo that week, we hosted 74 different delegations from around the world. So the thing that I really like about it is that in the same division, we work with the smallest farmer someplace in Wisconsin on any issue. It could be that he thinks his neighbor built a fence 4 feet onto his property. And in the same division, that same week, we might be entertaining a delegation from Brazil that's here to look at animal genetics at ABS and other genetic companies. And we cover just about everything. So if you could, we could go around the room, and if you could tell me your first name and what you're interested in, your main primary area of interest in agriculture is.
I'm Connor, and my dairy farm taking it over.
Okay, excellent.
Earlier.
Thank you. Tyler, dairy farm. Yes, farm.
My name is Shane. My dad runs a small cash grain operation, and actually I'm looking at going into agricultural education. So I figured something like this would be beneficial for all of us.
Certainly. Excellent. I'm glad to hear that too. We need lots of more Randys in the state, that's for sure. So what I wanted to do, because Randy told me we're kind of a diverse group, I didn't want to just focus on one part of agriculture, such as dairy or something. I wanted to go through briefly what we're seeing out there in the whole world of agriculture right now, because the division is really, integrated into Wisconsin agriculture. So we hear a lot and see a lot. So I wanted to kind of go through where we are in 2016 in Wisconsin agriculture. And then from there, we'll go into some basic business practices that would apply whether you're going into dairy farming, whether you're going into value added, or whether you're opening a coffee shop on Main Street. These are just basic business principles that every business really needs to pay very close attention to. Before I start, and we'll buzz through some of this stuff pretty quick, I think one thing to keep in the back of your mind, in the years that I have been, privy to those 2,000 phone calls a year coming in, you get a lot of insight into what works and what doesn't work in a farming operation. And though we usually point at, the dollars, I would say that the 2 primary causes of stress or failure in a farming operation are a lack of communication and the inability to adapt to change. That lack of communication can be within the family, that breaks down the family and makes the farm no longer sustainable. It can be between the farmer and his employees, and the farmer and his business partners, which would be his nutritionist, his agronomist, his lender. I'll give you an example. We had a call from a farmer, dairy farmer milking 350 head in June. Severe financial stress because of the milk price. We started working with him and encouraging him to take proactive steps to change the situation on the economic situation on his farm in June. He called us in September at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and said he did not have the money to pay his help. And the help said they were leaving if they didn't get paid. He has 350 head of cows to milk and he was by himself. And he said, what do I do? So here's an example of a lack of communication that should have been addressed before this, and also an example of the inability or the refusal to accept that there were changing economic conditions on the farm that needed to be addressed. We were very fortunate that we encouraged him to go out and talk to his help, to ask them to please stay through the weekend while we worked with the bank to get some of the security on the cows released so he could cull some cows, get some money. They would get their checks on Monday. And now he is working towards an orderly exit. So he could have avoided all of that if he would have recognized and communicated with his banker and with his employees and his and been receptive to change. Now that's easier said than done, I understand. He is under a tremendous amount of stress. But those are the things that we try to keep people out of and move them forward. So and agriculture, and what we'll talk about here, is something that is constantly changing. So if you were to read the headlines in the Wisconsin Agri News and one of the other farm papers today, you'd see signs of milk surplus and people worried about the impact of larger farms. And then how farmers are struggling with rising costs. You could read that in any paper that comes out this week. But those headlines are from the Monroe Evening Times newspaper in 1978, so it's 38 years ago. So some people would say, see, nothing ever changes in agriculture. It's always the same old thing. But as I go through this, I want to show you that agriculture has changed drastically over those times. What hasn't changed are the basic economic principles that guide not only agriculture, but every other type of business. So if you look back to 1978, we had 47,000 dairy farms in 1978. In 2014, we hit 9,800. We're at 9,400 today. I believe we'll go under 9,000 very soon. And we're probably going to keep moving down. The average herd size, look at that, 36 to 123. We averaged 11,000 pounds of milk in 1978. We're almost twice that now. Our corn acres, isn't that amazing? They've stayed about the same, but look at the yield that has changed. And then, of course, we grow a lot more beans than we did back then. And look at how the beans have come up since then. So that's how agriculture has changed since 78. And through the course of that, we've had to deal with this. This is the average milk price. So when I give a presentation to people who are not involved in farming, say like a chamber of commerce or a group of business executives, I always show this slide because I love to see the look on their face, because they'd say anybody who's in this business is crazy because you can't, and there's no consistency. So if we recognize this, it's kind of like the guy that needed to recognize that eventually he wasn't going to be able to pay his help. This is the reality, but we're still going to milk cows, and we're still going to be in agriculture in different ways, and we're going to figure out a way to handle this. How we put business practices in place that can handle this. So as you know, it's big business. We're going to drop down out of this $88 billion figure here because our prices are down. We're still representing almost 500,000 jobs in Wisconsin. So the change is the only constant. The markets, weather, technology, and people themselves in our lives, and what we expect out of our lives, and how we run what our priorities are constantly changing. So if you look at on the farm in 2016. Our milk production continues to go up. A lot fewer farmers. We have about the same number of cows, and we're getting a lot more milk out of those cows. It's 23 pounds more milk per cow, and some increase in the number of cows, and a tremendous flow of new heifers coming onto the farm because of the sex seed. And every one of those heifers has the genetic potential to milk more than its mother did. So Bob Kropp from the university reported this earlier this year, and we've seen all this come through except for the weather. The weather was, well, I won't say that. The weather was, El Nino was expected to produce a warm and wet summer, and that's definitely what we had. What it really means was we had another record growing season. And we have probably the most, from what farmers have told me, I have never had this much feed stored in winter. And that's going to mean more cows, more cattle, more hogs because of the amount of feed that we have. Exports have become increasingly important in the dairy situation as well as the grain sector. So if you look at how our cheese exports, which really drives our milk price here in Wisconsin, has gone up just in the last 10 years. So increased production plus increased demand, but we're still building inventories. It was said the other day that it isn't really a demand problem. There's good demand from around the world. It's improving. It could be better. It's an oversupply. And if you're, whatever type of agriculture you are in, but particularly if you are in organics or a value-added form of agriculture, we saw a survey that 84% of consumers revealed that they really had a lack of commitment to specialty items. And by that, the question was, if something changed in your personal economic situation, your rent went up, or your mortgage changed, or interest rates went up, or gas prices went back to $5 a gallon, where would you change your buying habits? What would you change to accommodate that? And 84% of it said it would be in the grocery store, meaning they would reduce their purchase of more expensive type of food. But right now, we haven't seen that, and that's why you have organic milk prices at the farm level of $36, $37 a hundredweight, and you have a strong demand. Right now, organic is the fastest growing food sector in Wisconsin. So we're going to have to learn, I believe, for a while, to live with $4 corn and $10 beans, and today you could probably change that to $3 and $9. We did have a rally this summer where some people priced in $4 corn, a lot of people missed it. And of course, we always have the weather unknowns. We're through that this year, but as we move into next year, and it's already time to start planning for spring expenses, next year's operating loans, the unknowns are weather and cost of production, exports in the world, economics and currencies. As we change administrations and reaction to whatever administration comes in from around the world, what that means to our partners and our markets around the world. I like this quote because I was up on a 900 cow dairy farm up by Green Bay, and the farmer said this, and it really struck me. He talked about how he started off farming milking 65 cows in the heats. In all these years, he has met every challenge by increasing production. He has rented more land, he's milked more cows, and he got more milk out of those cows all the way through. And he said, I am now at the point where what got me here won't keep me here. Because he is landlocked by Green Bay. He can't afford any more land. He can't milk any more cows. And he said, what I have to do now is look internally and figure out a better way to run my farm, a better way to run my business, and see if there are value-added opportunities out there for my milk, that I can still milk 900 cows, still farm the same amount of land that I'm getting, and stay here. But if I just try to do the same thing I've always done over the years, I will not survive. So we talked about the strong organic markets. I checked with an organic milk producer this week. He's contracted his milk for $37 a hundredweight picked up at the farm for the next year. Flat rate, no premiums. He just has to meet the somatic cell guidelines. He reports that finding organic inputs is a challenge. They're expensive. They've come down a little bit this fall, as all fertilizer prices have, because farmers have been cutting back, and fertilizer companies have responded to that. And going into, we get calls every day, and we actually have a person on my staff that really works with transitioning farmers from conventional to organics. And the first thing that Angie tells them is you have to realize how much work this is going to be. It's a 3-year process, but it's a lifelong learning process. And it's going to require a different mindset, a different way of looking at your farm, a different way of looking at your markets. That $35 to $37 a hundredweight attracts a lot of people. They're not quite as interested when they realize what you have to do to be an organic dairy farmer, how hard it is to do. So if we look at just the facts, the net cash farm income this year in 2016 is the lowest since 2009, which I talked about when we had the $9 milk. We're coming off record highs. Crop receipts, our livestock dairy, all dropped dramatically in just the last couple of years. Why did this happen? One of the top agricultural economists in the country retired from Virginia Tech. If you ever get a chance to see David Cole speak, he speaks in Madison about twice a year. He's a wonderful speaker, and he's very, very knowledgeable, and about 30 years of experience. And he talks about that we just came through the 4th super cycle since 1900. Super cycle means where everything came together. The weather, the markets, the productivity to provide exceptional economic benefit into the farm sector. And this last one, our last 4th super cycle, lasted 2.5 times longer than average. So what that means is it was really good on the farmers for a while, for a longer time than we saw. And it's because of our emerging markets, plus the demand for biofuels, really low interest rates, and Mother Nature. We haven't had a problem with Mother Nature other than isolated rain events since 2012 drought. So record profits. But as Cole says, easy money has been made, and now we have to start doing astute management. So let's talk about the management. What I wanted to do in that first section was just kind of show you what's going on out there, what we're seeing, and now how do you navigate that? I believe from my experience of looking at thousands of farm cases over the last few years, that every farming operation, whether you're a 5-acre pumpkin patch, whether you're an organic orchard, whether you're a 40-cow organic dairy farm, or you're a 250-cow conventional dairy farm, or you're a corn and bean operator, has to rely on 3 things: your production practices, your business practices, and your personal relationships. If you shorten any one of those, the stool tips over. So let's go through and see what that takes to do those 3 things. Let's look at the production practices. You have to have standard operating procedures on a farm on a daily basis. You have to, when you get into low prices, it's a double whammy if you're averaging 14,000 pounds per cow, or you're only averaging 90 bushels of corn when everybody else is 145. And now you not only have low prices, but you have low yields. No one's going to be able to handle those things on a production basis other than the farmer himself. And you have to do 1,000 little things every day. That standard operating procedures is one thing that I see when we work with farmers who are in trouble. Always shows up. And the examples are, can they get the work done every day? Can they get the work done efficiently? Every business on Main Street has standard operating procedures in place so that they can conduct an efficient operation day in and day out. And sometimes when we go out on farms, and one thing that I should mention is all of our services are free. We never charge, so we go out all across the state and walk the farms with people, sit down at the kitchen table with the farmer and his family, and talk through these things. It often comes up that you can see that they're struggling to get the work done. Either there's too much work and not enough help, facilities and the equipment are outdated, or they simply do not have the management capability to get up every day and work in a linear fashion to accomplish that day's goals. They shift around. When you see somebody who is still doing morning chores at 10:30 or 11 o'clock on a dairy farm, and they have a farming operation that runs at the same time, that's a red flag. And we see that a lot. So efficient production practices and being able to repeat that every day and have a system in place, just like any other business does. So the business practices. Gotta have the records that give you the information. If you don't have the records, it is no different than driving a car blind. And the most important thing was we ask the farmer, what's your cost of production? And it's very rare that they can answer that question. You can take a guess at it, but identifying what is it costing you to grow a bushel of corn? What is it costing you to produce 100 pounds of milk or to run an orchard or a vegetable operation? And have that a realistic figure, and that takes work because that cost of production is going to be changing all the time. It isn't something you can write on the wall and say that's what I'm doing. It changes almost on a monthly basis. You have to be able to manage your risk, and that is through efficient use of insurance policies, and also is for the risk of what happens if something occurs on the farm, such as a disaster as a drought, too much rain, or there is a risk management involved in just people. What if somebody leaves the farm? What if there's a health concern? You don't want to be managing an operation without paying attention to that risk. Let's go back to the example I gave you about the guy that couldn't pay the help. He should have identified that he was at risk over the summer of getting to that point. Risk management would have said, I've got to get my team in place. We're going to sit down, look at these figures, and we're going to figure out a way that we're going to avoid ever getting there. Because I'm running the risk of one week not being able to pay the help. And if that happens, I run the risk of the help. So all those things are tied together. So writing a business plan, I know that's what you're working on now. And writing a business plan that is flexible, not etched in stone, but then actually following it. And then going back to your records to make sure that you can change that business plan over time. And then be realistic about what it costs to live. And you mentioned it before. You mentioned about the healthcare and stuff like that. We always ask this question, and it's funny the answers that you if we might be talking to a farmer with 3 or 4 kids, the oldest in high school. We ask what their family living expenses are, and if they say $30,000 a year, it's probably 3 times that. They're just not factoring in everything that it costs them to actually live. It costs a lot of money to raise a family in town or on a farm. And trying to shorten that makes the cash flow look better, but the banker will identify that. So we need to be realistic about what it really costs to live in our society on a farm and raise, educate, feed, clothe, and take care of health care with our families. And the last thing is personal relationships. And I said before that the 2 biggest reasons I believe that farmers get into trouble is a lack of communication and the inability to change. And they're both really wrapped into this. I say avoid barn blindness. That was a phrase that my dad used to use when we would see, when he felt that we might be getting into the point where we couldn't see beyond the work, kind of like the old thing about not see the forest for the trees. And that goes back to those standard operating procedures and doing 1,000 things every day. Barn blindness means especially, I think it is especially prevalent on dairy farms. And I think that's because of the every 12 hours having to report to the barn and do the milking. If you are in that routine, it can easily become that you can't see beyond the next 12 hours. And then there's just a constant, you kind of get buried in the work and you can't see the bigger picture. And then when you suffer from barn blindness, it is really hard to be able to reinvest in your family, your community, or yourself. You're pretty much just a slave to work. And we see a lot of farmers doing that. It's very susceptible to people on that 65 to 100 cow dairy work. It's so much work, but it isn't big enough for you to hire a lot of help. So you're really responsible for that every single day of getting all that done. And then, okay, so if there's only so much that can be invested in getting everything done every day, and you have to get the work done, you have to get the cows milked, where does it come out of? Well, it comes out of your family's time, ability to function in your community, to enjoy other things, or in yourself. It gets back to that standard of living that we talked about before. And I think that has to be factored in. We see farmers all the time who haven't invested enough time or consideration into the personal cost of running a dairy operation. We just talked to one this week. He was milking. No, I take that back. He was not milking. It was about a 5,000 acre cash grain farm. And on his balance sheet, we noticed that he had a second home. So we said, what about liquidating the second home to try to draw the debt down? We're just trying to get this guy through the year so that we can look at this winter. Is he going to be able to rent this land, pay his operating costs and everything? So we identified this pretty nice second home. And he said, well, I can't sell that because that's where my wife lives. So right there, to us, that's a red flag. Okay, so there's been a breakdown in the family on that. Without knowing, there might be, I'm sure there are many reasons for that. But I think when we dig into it and really get to know this farming couple, I would bet that farm blindness has a big part of that. That there was too much energy poured into the farm, not enough energy poured into the life. So as we go through this year, we can just change this to 2017 because we're pretty well through this year. That volatility in prices. Right now, we're really not seeing that. We just have bad prices. We just have low prices. Milk has come up a little bit, but our corn and beans are still way down there. Pork and beef prices are also very depressed. So how do we manage those resources that I just talked about? How do we manage our human resources, people and our families? How do we handle the natural resources of the farming operation itself? And then what are our financial resources going to be coming into 2017? And what we are getting warned about from the banking community is farmers running out of working capital so that they're maximizing their operating loans. Meaning, say you had a $150,000 operating loan, you can't pay that down with these prices, so you roll that into a long-term mortgage to free up that $150,000 so you can farm another year. But if nothing changes, now you're going to roll that one in next year too, and the bankers are saying, we're only going to do this one time. There has to be a change. So being proactive and knowing that your financial resources are probably dwindling, and what we have to do to control the change, both in our personal lives and business as we move forward. So talk a little bit about our services and exactly what we can bring, and then we can have some general discussions. So I've talked to you about the farm center. So if you are farming now, you're considering farming, or you're considering going into farming with your family, this is a free resource you can use. And right now on my staff, I have about a combined 100 years experience in agricultural lending experience. So we can come out and sit down and look at business plans. We can look at your financial situation. We can try to stimulate that communication that needs to happen between family members and your banking and your other partners. And the Farm Center was established in 1984 as a crisis center due to the farm crisis in the 80s. We have tried to move it to a more proactive. It's not a whole lot of fun just to do crisis calls all day. So we want to be there before we get into a crisis. Again, my example of the guy that couldn't pay his help, we, instead of a 4 p.m. Crisis call on a Friday afternoon, we wanted to have that conversation in June. I would have liked to have had that conversation with them 2 or 3 years ago when milk was really good and say, okay, so let's shock test this. Let's say, what if milk drops to $13 or $15? What if interest rates go up? What if there's a health concern in the family? What if you have a health concern? Who's going to run this farm? All those things. Those are the types of conversations we have. And they're not always a lot of fun, but they're very important. And they bring a lot of value, and it sure beats not having the conversation. So we assist beginning farmers in financial planning. We have a herd-based diagnostics program where a veterinarian will go out and not look at the individual sick cow or calf, but look at the whole farm, the size of the free stalls, the amount of bunk space available, the quality of the forages, kind of a holistic look at the farm. We assist minority farmers across the state. We work a lot with the Hmong community. We work a lot with the fresh vegetable operations, particularly in the Milwaukee, La Crosse, Wausau, and Madison areas. As I said before, about half of our work is farm ownership transitions right now. The average age of Wisconsin farmer is 58. A lot of farmers are looking at how do they transition. You always want to transition the farm from a point of strength. We get calls from farmers who say, I really want to transition to my son or my daughter, but the balance sheet won't support that. You're just transferring too much debt or too much inefficiency onto the next generation. So first, it's kind of like when you put your house on the market, you want to make sure it looks nice and paint it and clean it up and everything. You got to have a farm that is cleaned up and looking good and financially strong before you transition it to the next generation, or the next generation is just taking on more debt and more problems than they can handle. Transitioning a dairy farm that needs extensive upgrading and remodeling of the facilities are depreciated out is very, very difficult at $17 an hour. We do legal and financial mediation. We have trained mediators available to us that will sit down with the family. We are doing one that came in this week. It was, I believe, 3 daughters on a farm, and the one daughter felt that her needs and her opinion was not valued by the others. So there was a very difficult family dynamic showing up where they were not getting along. We'll sit down with them. I'll have a trained mediator that walks through the process and tries to get a resolution. Now, we'll also do a trained mediation. We do a lot of them with FSA, because FSA is actually required to enter into mediation. So this spring, if FSA denies a operating loan to a farmer, and the farmer feels that that isn't fair, that he actually was doing better than FSA's analysis showed, then we'll sit down with FSA and the farmer and try to work through that process. And then this was something that we used to do a lot more of because we simply don't have the real energy issues of stray voltage and stuff that we used to. But at one time, that was a pretty big thing that the farm center did, was go out to see if the problems that they were having, milk production or whatever on the farm, was management problems, or did it was it heavily influenced by stray voltage on the farm. We don't do too many of those anymore. So at the end of last year, we had 118 active cases. You can see there where I said we're about 50-50 in financial and transitions. And going back and analyzing our last year, fiscal year 15 caseload, about 81% of the clients followed our recommendations. And we always make sure that the farmer understands it's his farm, it's his life. He's the one who's there 365 days a year. So we don't go in and say, do this, this, and this. What we want to say is, here are your options. There's pluses and minuses to every option on this list. Let us help you decide which one you want to pursue. And in the end, it's always up to the farmer to decide. So as going back to our friend David Cole again, he's saying looking forward, and no matter what business you are in, I think survivors will be the one who can navigate costs. Is very true. Looking ahead, the big term, big subjects that we see in agriculture is data management. All this information that's available, whether it's coming from a drone flying over a farm, or it's coming from new testing, or robotics, or milk production, sensors. How do you manage all that? How do you analyze all that with everything else that you have? So that it becomes not just more information that's weighing you down, but an actual tool to run your farm. Whether that farm's a 5-acre vegetable farm or a 5,000 cow dairy farm, how do you handle all the information that is available? And, you know, that's something that we're seeing throughout society as we have more and more information available to us on our phones. Just how do we manage that? You're going to hear a lot about animal welfare. A lot of the larger milk processors are moving towards a policy that they will not accept milk from herds that do not meet their requirements for animal welfare. And that could be if it's a chicken laying operation, where, how much time those birds spend in cages. Animal welfare on the dairy side, we're looking at tail docking, dehorning, all of these. How do you move a down cow? All those protocols are being driven by the consumer, who is insisting that they know that their milk is coming from animals who are treated well, or their eggs are, or whatever product. Because the consumers are so much more involved now in how their food is raised. And then, of course, nutrient management. You're going to hear a lot about water management, saving our soils, replenishing our soils. It's been said that today's farmers, 3 generations from knowing what really good soil looks like, because we have really mined the soil. At the Professional Dairy Producers of Wisconsin 2-day conference last week in Madison, there were 3 main subjects they talked about. One was animal welfare and how they can implement those protocols on the farm. The other was water, what they need to do on their farms to make sure that their nutrients are not washing into nearby streams and lakes. And then the third one was immigration and how changing immigration policy will affect their workforce. So those are 3 big things in our immigration. So we've talked a lot about how hard farming is. We've talked a lot about a lot of people got out of farming since 1978. But I don't want to leave it there because I want to encourage you to accept this. You just have to accept it knowing that the same principles that are applied to any business have to be applied to farming. I'll give you another story. So in 1978, when I started farming, I went to a farm meeting and the farm economy was really depressed. And we had so many farmers, like we used to take 5,000 phone calls a year at the farm center. We take 2,000 now, but we don't have as big a pool. We used to have over 100,000 dairy farmers in the state. So, and it was kind of a conversation like we're having now, only much more focused on everyone in the room's financial difficulties. And the room was packed. Again, we had so many farmers back then. And after this meeting ran late, and it was probably getting almost 10 o'clock at night at the county extension office, and this farmer stood up in the back, and he said, I just want to say that no one has ever held a gun to my head and told me I had to farm. He said, I farm because I love being on my farm, I love working with my family, and I will get through all these things. Somehow I will pay that price in order to be a farmer. And he sat down. And that's how the meeting ended. And how many years ago was that? Since 1978? I still remember him saying that. And how quiet that room got. Because it had been pretty boisterous for all those times. Or throughout the meeting. So one of the trends that I wanted to talk a little bit about was the local foods. It's hard to have the right term for it. So we call it value-added agriculture a little bit. And, you know, I would say over every year, our call volume on and interest in value-added production goes up. And it's really driven by two things, the consumer demand and farmer preference. And I'll explain that a little bit. On the consumer demand, the consumers are looking for three things in their food. They want it to be raised locally, they want it to be fresh, and they want it to be free from certain things.
Would you say that that is a trend that's happening right now? Looking as bad versus when we had that bubble bust in 2008. How was the trend then is the question, and how do you compensate in the case that happened?
And I think that is why it is the interest goes around major metropolitan areas, because there's the income in those metropolitan areas in Madison or La Crosse or something like that to support those things. And I think your point is very valid.
I think your survey data that you pointed to,
It's 84%.
So that's where they come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, which is.
And people on the lower end of the economic scale that struggle to pay their rent, they don't participate in this economy. So as our economy grows and more people are able to say, I have discretionary income and I'm going to apply it in my food diet, then they start making those decisions based on those three criteria of local, fresh, and free from. There's a strong demand by the people who have the time to invest in it, that they know their farmer, they know where their food was grown, how far it traveled, what was the carbon footprint of that. We just did a seminar on this at DATCP to about 40 people last week on the carbon footprint of dairy. What does it cost what is the carbon footprint on the farm through packaging, processing, distribution? For lots of people now today, you've heard the word foodie. Good food is a priority. People who can are willing to pay more for it. This has really driven this whole value-added food system. In the dairy industry right now in Wisconsin, the number one success story we have, I would say, alongside with organics, and lots of times they're intertwined, is our specialty cheeses that go all around the world. Instead of a commodity-based cheese where we just put out the same cheddar or something like that, these, like that Hooks or any of these real
We have two champions here just over the border in Sauk County, Car Valley and John Brown Cedar.
Yep.
The chalet on the road that is a limiter.
So that brought, where would our dairy industry be without that?
Great brothers over
And so really that interest is driven by people's commitment to their own health, to how they feel society should be producing food. And so really a philosophical idea of a combination of health, social, and philosophical that says I want my food produced locally, I want it to be fresh, and I want it to be free from this, this, and this when it reaches my family's table.
Do you also think this is a generational thing?
Yeah.
One of the interesting things too that's happened, Dan, is, in Madison, there's hardly a restaurant that you can go to that doesn't have some level of connection. So that, from a farmer's perspective, that's where they want to sell their top value, or at least work with that. So you get a taste of that in the restaurant, you're well paid, but also my top cuts. But then you start to see there's also these institutional markets that have popped up around it. At some school this year in Sauk Prairie, they've had local foods in the school system. That's where companies like Wisconsin Food Hub kind of help package that a little more wholesome for others up here.
Yeah.
Places like that.
Frieslanders.
So the local dollar-driven part of the consumers themselves has started to change how all of the systems are working together. And there's starting to be more infrastructure around the whole system.
Well, I know I go to like picnics in Columbus, even around the vegetables will say, where it's grown.
Yeah.
The potatoes are from, up by almond or whatever, the apples, cherries.
I just went to Woodman's yesterday and got some awesome potatoes.
Yeah.
Wisconsin potatoes.
One of the questions or calls that I get from people, whether it's a legislator or people in the community, is, what is being done to get more people on farming? And I'm really happy for the value added sector because we use kind of a bow tie image of agriculture today where there's the big farms are pretty strong, your 5,000 cow dairy or whatever it is, and then it gets narrow in the middle, and that middle ground is squeezed really tight. That's a hard place to be if you're milking, a couple hundred cows and you're doing a lot of the work yourself and stuff. That's tough, and then it expands at this end, which is the value added food. And I think without that value added food, we wouldn't have so many people interested in getting involved in farming like you and your husband are. I think that's at a level that it can be profitable, it can be fun, it can be rewarding, and it can be, if they can secure a certain amount of land or the ability to start on that people have done really well in that small, especially around our metropolitan areas where they can go direct farm to table marketing. And then we'll still, there's still challenges on the big end, whether it's nutrient, it's all the things we went through, nutrient management, labor, animal welfare, or whatever. I think that's going to continue. I think we're going to see continued growth in the value-added sector. People that want to go into farming either full-time on a small scale or as a second career. And obviously, I don't think our large farms are going to go away. And that middle section is probably going to drift back and forth one way or another until it kind of finds its area. But right now, the middle area is a tough place to be.
Well, and when you were saying what I also thought was interesting, which of course also in healthcare, is the idea of how old is the average farmer, the baby boomer phenomenon, what's going to happen to those guys? Where are they going to go and who's going to take over?
And as people look for, rewarding work and being able to and really get interested in remaining close to the land and growing food, such as all of you are, I think that local value-added industry in Wisconsin is going to stay very strong.
So is on-farm business, I know they're not new, but are you getting more and more of them? Like you said, I know I have a friend that's quality management at Craig Brothers, and she's been about 3 years. There's also, Sassy Cow.
Yeah.
And I get my strawberries out of place between Beaver Dam and Columbus. Are you seeing a lot more of those where they're, doing, pick your own and produce our milk and cheese directly on the farm?
Yes. And a lot of people want to get into that. I'm glad you mentioned the on-farm processing plants. And Randy mentioned before the goat dairies have been very, like Diana Murphy at Cross Plains has been very successful milking her own goats with their own on-farm creamery and turning it into award-winning cheese. We have many more people like that. We have about 14 herds in the state now of milking sheep, which is sheep make people really like the sheep cheeses. So that's kind of, they've just formed an organization and they're kind of growing that. So you have these, I call them non-traditional farming operations that have really gained some strength in the last couple of years. So that's, as you build your careers, just be receptive to that and aware of that movement. Because unless, as you point out, there's a major economic turn down or something like that, I think those things are going to continue to grow. And they've gotten tremendous support, as Randy said, from the restaurant industry.
It seems to me that, your example of the 900 cow dairy that started with 65 and through expansion and growing, maintaining his life as a dairyman was fine to get to where he's at. But he said, I can't do that. Right? It seems to me for our younger dairymen in particular and crop growing farmers, we've got to get back to a place where you're maybe not just focused on that, but also take advantages. Shane mentioned the idea that lavender is a 1 acre.
Yeah, I just Googled, what was it, crops on small acreage, and lavender, like I said, popped up number 1.
Yeah.
So it's huge.
Connor and his family have integrated using cover crops, and they use that as part of their feed ration. So that adaptability Dan talked about that's so crucial. I think that's how we get over the hump. There's a gal that works for you sometimes that does a beef burner, husband to a beef, but they direct market and they also sell the commodity from that. So it's not, if you're going to get into the vegetable market, you probably don't want to just make it all on selling CSA. Maybe the whole idea with the Wisconsin Food Hub is now you have a more commodity-based, a set contract of a certain volume at a certain price you're going to get, and then you can grow more and sell at a higher rate. I mentioned a friend of mine, Christie's, they sell their high-end beef to restaurants so that they can figure out how to market and sell that. But beef has a lot of hamburger too. There's what do you do with that? So working your way through these alternative markets and understanding the cost of production. One of the things I've been trying to have people think about is that we're writing our business plans now, at the end of this class, but this is a lifelong process. I chose this product, the egg plant tool that we're using, because it's yours to take with you. At the middle of December, when hopefully hopefully you come back for more classes, but maybe we'll say goodbye then. We'll really be able to work together. That tool is yours forever, and you can use that and keep using that as this adaptability. This is one of the nice things about it.
So no matter what type of operation you move into, good luck. Let us help you if we can. Whether you're on 5 acres or you're on a large crop farm or whatever you do in agriculture, you're here to help. So thanks for letting me come in and talk to you today. And good luck, and you have my contact information, so shoot me an email at any time, and I can always put you in touch with people on my staff that will be willing to help.
I have a question. What about when you do reach the ceiling for your capabilities? My dad's farm is 160 acres, and like a road ag. We do some cash crop operations where we do custom harvesting, custom trucking. But we've got Bruce Company on one side of us. We've got a fairly moderate dairy farm. I think there are about 200 cows on the other side, and the other side is another dairy farm or large grain operation. So we're kind of landlocked. So you can't really expand out. I mean, eventually, you do soil testing, and you do nutrient management. You might get up around 200 bushel an acre, but eventually you are going to hit that ceiling. What do you recommend to farmers then? I mean, just keep doing what they're doing, or is that when you start, hey, what other crops can you do to maybe improve income? Or
I think it's kind of back to what that one farmer was saying about not being able to expand horizontally anymore. So you need to, a vertical type of expansion would be, going into different types of crops or different type of marketing, but try to maximize your income potential and at the same time control your risk and your expenses on what you do have, because you're not going to be able to expand horizontally.
Not forever. I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to reach a ceiling or something else.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation.
I was at in my soils class, which you might want to take next year, we talked a lot about soil health, principles of soil health today. I was just thinking about your farming situation there. One of the things that soil health is about is keeping the soil covered and making sure you have cover purposes that are incorporated into that.
Yeah, we don't do tillage fields, but we always, leave the trash outside.
We were in our soil health training. We were talking a little bit about what the NRCS soil health specialist was saying that, well, there's 4 principles. He brings in the 5th of getting the animals engaged into the farming process. So I was asking, well, how does a crop farmer? What are some things they can do as a crop farm. It's like, well,
I was
if
thinking about that
you
too.
do cover crops, like using a rye or something as a cover crop, they'll turn that into a silage.
Yeah.
You can make that, but you could also maybe set up a partnership with your neighbor dairy.
Yeah, exactly. I know we got a couple. I know around Belleville, there's quite a few, several hundred acre or 100 head dairy farms. And I know manure management, especially Dane County, is a huge thing because it can't be spread in the winter on so much of a degree slope and everything. And I know, Dane County's so finicky about manure management.
Right.
I even thought about doing that, looking into, hey, in the spring, you got all these pit you guys think, oh, can you spread some out? Because I know we looked into Metro Grow, and that is just ridiculous to get on the waiting list. It's actually a waiting list for Metro.
With that partnership, maybe they don't have the acreage to spread their manure. The other thing maybe there's opportunity for you to work with them and set up a custom grazing outlet for their house or something like that. It could be a mineral farmer outside of some cities.
I know when I worked for Lycon for concrete, we poured on a farm outside Wanakee that all they did was raise calves to first spring heifers for Wagner dairy farms.
Yeah.
That's all they did.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. There's